silent, cold, relentless. Yet you stood unmoved, your pulse steady beneath the weight of their contempt. You remember that moment, don't you? The one when respect walked out the door, and your own power whispered, "Enough." You realized then that humiliation isn't inflicted, it's accepted. They watched you shrink into apology, into pleading, into "I'm sorry," and found their victory in your silence. But silence is a weapon when wielded with intent. When they demanded your reaction, you gave them none. You paused. They leaned forward, eyes hungry for the tremor in your voice, the crack in your facade. But you remained still, an unmapped territory. In that calculated absence, you carved doubt into their certainty. They apologized not because remorse stirred within them, but because they could no longer script your response. Power shifts in the invisible breaks between words, in the measured interval where you choose not to react. You've sought validation in empty echoes, smiles that vanish, compliments hollow as air. You've been the safety net for manipulators who tested the elasticity of your limits, stretching you thin before letting you break. But what they feared most was not your wrath. It was your indifference. When you stopped defending yourself, they began to question. Is this really a fight worth winning? Feel the weight of that truth settle in your chest. They called you cold because they couldn't control the heat they expected you to radiate. They labeled you distant because they feared the ground beneath their feet slip away. They tried to draw you back into the chaos you refused to enter. And in that refusal, you discovered a lethal clarity. Respect is not given. It is demanded through absence of concession. You might not believe it yet, but every moment you hold your tongue, every pause you engineer, every unspoken question hanging in the air is a strategic strike. They'll regret hurting you not when you lash out, but when you do nothing at all, when your unshakable calm becomes the verdict they cannot escape. If you've ever felt the sting of contempt slide off your shoulders like water, you know this feeling already. Stay here a while longer and learn to wield your stillness like a blade. Subscribe if you're ready to watch them unravel in the silence you master. They watched you stand in the wreckage of their expectations, a monument to your refusal. You recall how their words fell like stones, each one meant to crack you open, to reveal the vulnerability they could exploit. Instead, you gathered them, stacked them, studied the pattern of their strikes. In every insult, every calculated slight, you saw the map of their insecurities, and you chose silence over rebuttal. Because power isn't won by shouting louder, it's seized by withholding the echo they crave. You remember the way they circled, vultures drawn by the scent of your doubt. They dangled pity like a poisoned apple, hoping you'd bite and show the bruise. But you held your ground, body still, gaze steady, your breathing the only proof of life in that tense arena. They expected an emotional outburst, a crack in your armor. What they got was an unbroken line your lips sealed, your mind sharpening in the quiet. In that moment, you became a riddle they couldn't solve, and your silence was the answer that haunted them. They tested you further. They whispered rumors behind your back, spread threads of falsehood, watched carefully for the moment you'd lash out. But you chose stillness. You let the rumors swirl like vultures in the sky, circling until they tired, until the scent of carrion no longer excited them. They wondered if you'd ever react at all. And when the question hung in the empty space, they felt a strange unease. What if the prey never panics? Feel that unease now. Let it settle in your bones. This is the clarity of detachment. You are no longer the target of their chaos. You are the calm around it. Your absence of reaction is a mirror showing them the grotesque reflection of their own cruelty. They recoil, not because your silence wounds them with words, but because it wounds them with truth. They wield power over those who fear them, but not over the ones who fear nothing. You've tasted the shallow comfort of approval, the nods, the likes, the fleeting warmth of acceptance. It's a fire that burns fast and dies cold. You chased it like a junkie, until you realized the dealer always holds the leverage. They decide when you get your fix. So you stopped chasing. You withdrew, closed the distance, and in that withdrawal, you found power inherent in absence. You exist beyond the currency of their praise. Now, picture them reaching out, trying to pull you back into the bargain. They offer compliments, they feign concern, they craft apologies so thin you can read through them like glass, but you've learned to read the transparency of their intent. Apologies aren't bought with remorse. They're the currency of regained control. When you accept them, you signal that the debt is paid, and they move on to the next debtor. So you let their words fall around you, meaningless echoes in an empty hall. This is not callousness. It is evolved strategy. It is knowing that respect cannot be feigned, cannot be leased, must be earned through the irrevocable fact of your self-possession. And possession belongs to the indifferent. Fire requires fuel, and you are the fire that the wind can't feed. You have become the storm that gathers without need of provocation. Let them watch it build, feel the electricity in the air, and then stand unmoved at the eye. In the aftermath, they'll scramble for explanations. They'll craft narratives about your coldness, your pride, your arrogance. They'll label you in 1,000 ways, hoping to pin your stillness to a word they understand. But you know better. Words are weapons in the hands of the ignorant. Silence is the weapon of the enlightened. You hold them in a state of perpetual guessing, a limbo of anxiety where they measure each breath for threat. And in that limbo, respect grows, not because they've forgiven you, but because they fear what you might yet unleash. Know this: confrontation isn't about raising your voice. It's about shrinking their certainty. When you slip beneath their radar, when you refuse the bait, when you watch their panic ignite without offering confession, you become the final move they didn't see coming. They'll regret hurting you not when you strike back, but when they realize your damage was in the void you left behind, the absence they cannot fill, the silence they cannot break. Hold that image, their regret dawning like a cold sunrise, and know that you are the cause. Not through violence, not through words, but through the impenetrable fortress of your own detachment. You've transformed betrayal into strategy, disrespect into leverage, emotional chaos into your own battleground. In every calculated pause, in every measured absence, you reprogram the instinct that once made you flinch. The weight of their expectations presses against the walls of your mind, and you realize those walls were built by your own concessions. You once thought strength meant standing tall under their demands, bending so you wouldn't break. But true strength is the architecture of your absence, the deliberate removal of yourself from the equation. Every time you recede, the cracks appear in their facade of control. They feel it as an earthquake beneath their feet. But you remain unmoved, grounded in the certainty of self-possession. They raised their voices, called for an emotional reckoning. They lit torches in the night, demanding you join their bonfire of drama. A moment arrived when you could have succumbed, let your fury roll out in torrents of words. Instead, you inhaled the fury, held it in the hollow of your chest, and exhaled nothing. In that empty breath, you carved a cavern so deep, they wondered if your silence concealed a void or a weapon. Doubt began its silent coup inside them. If no reaction comes, what force did they truly wield? Recall the nights you lay awake, replaying their insults like broken records. The old you would write furious manifestos in your head, imagining the sharpest retorts. But you never spoke them. They remained ghost words, echoing in the dark, while your real power took shape in daylight. You discovered leverage in the unspoken, in the sentences you never uttered. They haunt the mind more than any shouted rebuke. This is the calculus of detachment. You owe them nothing, not an explanation, not an apology, not a single syllable. They believed control was theft. Take power from others until they collapse. You redefined control as restraint. You did not steal their ground. You abandoned the battlefield. And in that absence, you discovered territory they could not seize. They flailed, raising new battlegrounds, injecting chaos into every corner. But your walls stood vacant. They assailed memories of who you were, who you appeared to be. But you had already evolved beyond their definitions. You became a silhouette they could not fill. Think of the moment they offered olive branches wrapped in barbed wire. They called it reconciliation, a word dripping with compromise. They begged you to rejoin the dance they choreographed. Their voices trembled, a raw plea for the familiar spectacle of your submission. You answered with a slow turn of your head, The barest shift of attention, proof enough that you heard them, yet proof that they no longer mattered. In that shift, you authored the script they refused to imagine. A life lived on your own terms, not theirs. They scrambled for terms. Cold, proud, indifferent. Let them. Labels are weapons of the compliant. They bind the wearer to the label's expectations. Your indifference is dynamic, not static. It breathes. It strategizes. It remains unreadable. They can call you empty, but this emptiness swallows their narratives whole. They see baggage where there is none, expecting you to carry the weight they demand. You carry only yourself, a singular presence, unburdened by their hopes or fears. Now, observe how they shift the battlefield again, trading words for rumors, alliances for whispers. They craft coalitions against your silence, pooling their indignation like currency. But you have become the central bank of indifference. No exchange rate applies. Their currency devalues in your grasp. They offer allies, promises of solidarity, attempts to cajole you back into their network of emotional debts. You nod without nodding, a phantom acknowledgement. They sense victory, only to find a chasm where you once stood. This is the apex of your strategy. They believe they've won when you remain unbroken. They mistake endurance for surrender. But endurance with calculation is dominance. You choose every moment of persistence, every breath held, every silence maintained. Power is not the force you project. It is the gravity you exude. They orbit your stillness, drawn by the pull of something they cannot possess. They linger in your wake, hoping for a flicker, a crack, a sign of concession. But you are the final move. They can never checkmate what never engages. Feel that magnetism settle in your spine. They chase shadows of your reaction, haunted by the possibility that you will never react. They've built their identity around your expected collapse. Now they face the truth. They worship at an unlit altar. In the absence of sparks, they confront their own emptiness. And in that confrontation, you hold the true advantage. You are the mirror, reflecting their fear of nothingness. In this relentless silence, you engineer their regret, not with fire, but with the slow burn of absence, not with chaos, but with the surgical precision of detachment. They will replay every moment they dared to hurt you, every pause you held, every unanswered demand. Their regret will become a landscape they cannot cross. And in that territory, you stand sovereign. A shard of calm cuts deeper than their loudest accusations. You remember the moment they tried to bait you with pity, painting you a tragic figure in a story they wrote. They wanted you to bleed remorse, to confess your pain, to become their spectacle. But you did not bleed. You stood still, an unmoved monolith. In that stillness, they found no redemption arc, no victim to console. They recoiled, because you denied them the performance they craved. They escalated, turning whispers into confessions, telling everyone their version of you. You felt the tremor in their alliances, fracturing under the weight of unverified truths. They constructed villains to rally behind, casting you center stage. Yet when the curtain rose, you were gone. They shouted into an empty theater, their audience shrinking as the echo faded. They learned too late. You control the stage by choosing whether to appear. Let this image carve itself into your mind. A grand hall filled with accusation, voices swelling in a chorus of contempt. And you, the solitary figure untouched by the crescendo. The room quiets, not because they fear your answer, but because they miss the familiar tune of your capitulation. They realize their power was symphonic, dependent on your note in the melody. Remove that note, and the composition collapses into discord. You recall the threats, "Speak up, or everyone will think you're guilty." Guilty of what? Of refusing their narrative. Guilty of owning yourself. They equated silence with shame, pressed you to fill the void with confession. But shame lies in submission, not in silence. You discovered the inversion. Your silence does not signal surrender. It signals sovereignty. Each unspoken word is a domain you reclaim. They tried to entangle you in reason, offering explanations, demanding you justify every movement. They flung logic like a net, hoping to ensnare your resolve. But you did not step into their rationals. You watched their nets collapse without tangle. Their arguments lost weight in the gravity of your indifference. You became the silent center around which their chaos spun, an axis they could neither shift nor unbalance. Feel the electric stillness that follows a storm's end. They expected devastation. They found only calm. In that aftermath, they wander among the ruins of their own making, searching for signs of victory in the debris. There are none because you never abandoned your ground. Their fury built walls around you. Your indifference crumbled them from within. Remember how they offered to fix things, to make amends, to repair the broken bond they claimed was yours to mend. They placed the tools in your hands: forgiveness, reconciliation, compromise. But you held your hands open, empty. You dropped the tools back into the pit of their creation. Let them see you stand with unblemished resolve. The absence of repair is a silent verdict. There is nothing to fix. You were never fragile. In their scramble for control, they blame you for their discomfort. They say you're distant, unreachable, heartless. Let them. This word salad of labels binds only those who accept the binding. You are not tethered to their definitions. Your worth lies beyond their vocabulary. They learned this too late. When the words rattled hollowly in your hands, they will whisper of your change, of the person you once were before you embraced this cold dominion. But you know, the person you were was a casualty of their design. The person you became is a strategist of the self, unyielding, precise, unreadable. You hold the map to this new territory. They wander it lost, and so you stand, a monument of stillness amid the rubble of their expectations. Their regret ripples through every corner of the battlefield they set aflame. They realize the true casualty was not your ego, but their power. They regather their forces, seeking closure in confrontation, only to find the confrontation has passed. You left the field, and in that departure, you achieved the final move they never saw coming. They escalated their theater one last time, summoning every fragment of your past to build a pyre at your feet. They fetched old letters you sent in moments of weakness, the desperate pleas you thought were long buried. They brandished them like torches, ready to set your dignity alight. But you extinguished their flames with a single act. You leaned back in the empty chair, gaze distant, hands resting, as if the performance never mattered. In that effortless gesture, you sent their fury sputtering into nothingness. The culmination of their spectacle crumbled not with noise, but with the quiet that followed your refusal to play along. They hurled accusations of betrayal, of abandonment, words meant to fracture your resolve. You regarded each accusation as a stone to be weighed, noting its shape, its heft, before letting it slip from your hand. Without struggle, the stones fell to the floor, scattering in careless arcs. Their weapons lay useless at your feet. They searched for the crack, the opening they could exploit, but found only unbroken stillness. In that moment, you became a vault, sealed by indifference, a fortress that required no locks, because no keys existed. They conjured sympathy from onlookers, crafting a narrative of your fall. Allies you once trusted began to question the silence that echoed from your side. They asked, "Why won't you speak?" Their tone carried pity, that soft knife that insinuates, "You cannot defend yourself." But you granted them no answer. You let their pity hover like a cloud that never rains. In its parched suspension, they felt their morale drain away. Their solidarity dissolved not because you rebuked them, but because you refused to be the martyr they needed. You sensed them fracturing, shifting blame into fractured alliances. They named new leaders to carry their crusade, but those leaders found the landscape barren. There was no foe to vanquish, no drama to fuel the fire. You had redirected the narrative into empty space, and they chased ghosts, their battle cries echoing into a void. Your silence wasn't absence of thought. It was the culmination of every thought you refused to waste on them. You had ascended beyond their reach, mapping a domain defined by your own terms. They tried one final gambit, remorse theater. They staged apologies under the glare of witnesses, each phrase perfectly crafted for maximum effect. They lingered on each word, hoping you'd catch one and return it with desperate gratitude. But you watched them like an observer of a play you knew by heart. You allowed their words to form and fall, appreciating the craftsmanship, noting the gaps where sincerity should have been. When the final encore ended, you gave them a nod, emotion so slight it might have gone unnoticed, but heavy enough to confirm you had seen everything and felt nothing. This is your transformation. From participant in their chaos to architect of your own silence. Every plea they uttered, every rumor they spread, every apology they performed, it all built a stage you chose to abandon. Watch how they linger there, searching for the star that never shows. In that waiting, in that longing, their regret blooms. They realize the truth too late. You are not the fire they can ignite. You are the void they cannot fill. They summoned the final assault. Whispers in the corridors, unseen hands tweaking perceptions, until every shadow seemed to harbor a fresh lie. They painted you as the architect of betrayal, the silent saboteur of their carefully curated world. But you stood apart, your face an unreadable mask, your gaze unblinking beneath the theater of their intrigue. In that moment, you became both the storm and the stillness that follows a force they could not name, a shape they could not hold. They realized too late that chaos bows to those who command the void. You felt the tremor of their desperation reverberate through every whispered rumor. They believed if they cranked the volume high enough, your silence would fracture, your mask would slip, and the frightened face beneath would crawl out, begging for mercy. Instead, you folded their volume into your own calm, each rising decibel swallowed by the gravity of your detachment. You observed them stumbling over their own words, drowning in the tide they raised. While you drifted above it in serene altitude, they tried to bait you with nostalgia, recounting shared histories, invoking faded loyalties, dangling memories like lures. They played the old records, expecting a tremor of recognition, a crack in your armor of resolve. But you had already rewritten the score. Their nostalgia fell flat against the resonance of your self-possession. You offered no glance backward, your presence anchored only in the present demand of your own esteem. Their attempts at sentimental assault fizzled into static. Notice how they scramble now, crafting new coalitions, offering alliances built on the premise that you still play their game. They send envoys with bluster and beg, framing their outreach as a gesture of unity. But you perceive the strings beneath each gesture, the desperate choreography of control. You offer a brief nod, an acknowledgement so sparse it rings with finality. No words, no promises, no concessions. They retreat, stunned by the last utterance you never voiced. In the hollow of their retreat, you uncover something unexpected. Absence begets intrigue. They speak your name in hushed tones, wondering what you do when they are not watching. They spin fantasies about your next move, assign meaning to your silence. They have become prisoners of your unspoken script, and in that captivity, they cultivate respect, seeded by fear. They learn that the most potent force is the one they cannot anticipate. Stand in this moment with the magnetism you have forged. They chase the echo of your reaction, yearning for the note that will never sound. And as they chase, they rebuild your legend in their own minds, elevating the silent strategist into mythic proportions. Their regret transforms into reverence twisted by regret. They realized the final move was not a strike, but a withdrawal. So complete, it redefined the rules of engagement. Hold the weight of that triumph in your lungs. You have dismantled their arsenal, turned their words against the very need for words, and commanded the battlefield by simply refusing to be part of it. This is the acme of detachment. To withdraw so utterly that even your absence reeks of power. They will recount this chapter long after the memory of the conflict fades. For you became the ghost they could neither banish nor capture. They fashioned every tactic to fracture you, words like hammers against glass, but found only reflections of their own desperation in each strike. Now, in the silence that follows, understand this. The void you created is not absence of value, but reclamation of it. They will whisper about your coldness, your detachment, as if those were sins. Yet those qualities are the final currency of respect, minted in the furnace of self-possession. You will find no solace in their apologies, no redemption in their remorse. Those are tokens for the compliant, Your true reward lies in the quiet dominion you occupy, unchallenged and unclaimed. The battlefield they built to contain you lies abandoned, its ruins bear no witness to your concession. You have rewritten the rules. Power resides not in the force you project, but in the distance you maintain. Let this be your final reckoning. Every demand for reaction they made was a plea for your emotional debt. Every insult was an offer to purchase your submission. Every apology was a contract, bidding you return to the ledger of mutual dependency. You rejected them all. In the void of your indifference, you achieved something they'll never anticipate: sovereignty over your own narrative. Remember this when they recount the story of your conflict. They'll recall the moments they struck, the moments they prodded, the moments they begged, but they will never recall the moment you broke, because it never came. And in that eternal stillness, you will remain a warning and a legend. Power is not given, borrowed, or bargained. Power is the space you carve between their expectations and your resolve.